Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Lone Wolf 902. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at another titanium tent stove. This one is coming from Pomoly. It is called the T1 Mini. I also have the T1 regular to do a side-by-side comparison. So let's get both stoves out, set up, and let's start talking about them. So starting off with the T1 Mini, let's open up the package and see what we've got inside. So they did send me a pair of cut gloves, which is really helpful for assembling the stovepipe because it is very, very sharp. I have the piece that connects to the stove with the damper so you can connect the pipe to the top lid. I have a spark arrestor, which is very handy. I also have a 3-meter pipe. I requested a 3-meter pipe with this stove because I have other tents that are very tall, and I have a lot of 6-foot pipes, which is 2-meter. So they have sent me a 10-foot pipe. We're going to be using the 6-foot pipe out of the T1 stove to burn this in today, but it does come with a pipe and the rings wrapped in plastic there. And then we've got the actual T1 stove, nice and compact, very, very nice. And it looks great. So let's get this set up and let's set the T1 up for a good side comparison. And then we'll start talking about the specs and we'll take some measurements and then we'll get some fire going inside of the stove. Alright, so the assembly with the T1 Mini is very, very simple and very similar to the T1. Here we have the top lid, really nice, and then here we've got a look at the front of the stove. Simply open up the front, open up the rear, same thing with the side panels, and then we have little finger tabs there. You just rotate those down to where they lock in. Same thing on the other side. Put the top on, and then the same thing with the top. Little finger tabs, rotate those till they lock in. I can see what's going on here. They lock in very nicely. Same thing on the other side. Very simple setup, very easy on the hands too. So if it's really cold out and you just got into camp and you're trying to get your stove set up quickly, very, very easy, bam, done. There are 2 titanium screws on top. Undo these very easily. Place your, I call this kind of like the pipe manifold. This is the part that goes onto the stove. Line up the 3 prongs, rotate it. It slides into the screw holes just like that. And this is very well constructed, also I will mention. So I'll tighten this down and then we'll get the legs out. So the legs are located on the bottom, just like the T1. Basically everything on this stove is just a shrunken down version of the T1. So you can see, really nice stove, really compact, small. It does feature 1 glass window. You have a look inside. And they did change a few bits of pieces of hardware, mainly this little knob right here to work the vent in the front, which is really nice and easy. And it is an excellent little backpacking stove. So let's get the T1 set up and then we'll look at them side by side. I do have a measuring tape. We'll take some measurements to compare the sizes, and then we'll get the pipe put on top and we'll get some firewood put inside the stove. We'll light it and we'll see how it performs. All right, so here we have our 2 titanium stoves. We've got T1, T1 Mini. Let's talk about measurements first off. So let's talk about the width. For the width of the T1, we come in at 8 inches, 8/7/8. For the top of the T1 Mini, we are 7 5/8. For the length, we are coming in at 15 1/4. For the T1 Mini, we are coming in at 12 inches. For the height of the T1 Mini, we are 5 7/8 just about. And for the height of the T1, we are coming in at 7 1/8 of an inch. So one thing I did notice between the 2 stoves, looking at them, is the spark arresters are actually different sizes. So they're the same height, but it's the diameter that's different. So this one will not fit. Well, it does fit actually. It fits, but it won't fit on the pipe as loosely as it should with the pipe that goes to this. This one that I use on the T1 is a lot bigger on that, okay? So they fit, but they're gonna be loose. As you can see, that one fits inside of the T1 Mini T1. It actually fits inside of it. So I guess they do work. I feel that the one for the T1, if you use it on the T1 Mini, it'll probably wobble on top and it might fall off due to wind if you don't have it guyed out with the guy out lines. And this one, it looks like it would be a very, very snug fit on the top of the pipe for the T1. And obviously it fits on the T1 Mini because that's what it came with. So a small difference in diameter with the spark arresters, but looks like it'll work on both stoves. So overall height from the ground, from the table, we have 11.5 inches. And then on the T1 Mini from the ground, we have 9.5 inches. So based off those measurements that I've just gave you for the stoves, I feel that they are pretty different in size, enough to justify having a large stove and a small stove. So some of the differences that they made from the T1 to the T1 Mini, not just the spark arrestor diameter, but you'll notice the glass on this is more of a recessed glass. It's a flat and flush, whereas the T1 kind of protrudes out. They changed the hardware to the vent from this little ring system to the little knob here, making it very, very easy to access. Very sleek and very slim design, which I really like about this stove. They've added extra reinforcements on this little manifold piece, so they actually put little rivets on the side. I've never had an issue with this one, but I feel that they just added it there just to upgrade it. The damper works very, very similar, just like the T1, works really well. The folding design is the same, the leg design is the same. The main difference between the stoves, this is 1 millimeter thickness of titanium, I should mention that. This is also 1 millimeter. However, the Mini does not have any baffling running along the bottom. The T1 original does. So this baffling is mainly because this is a larger surface, and whenever you have a large surface, it's going to want to deform with the heat. This isn't as large, it's much smaller, so it's less prone to warpage and deformation. We're going to find out when we burn in it. But this one does have the ribs on the bottom of the stove. It also has them on the inside of the lid, so there's 3 underneath inside of the stove. So this stove has very, very, very minimal warpage, and once you get it back together, the warpage basically goes away. I love this stove, and I use it probably easily the most out of all of my titanium stoves up to today, okay? So this stove, like I said, no baffling. It comes in at 4.6 pounds. Not too bad for a backpacking or a backpacker type style titanium stove. Very sleek, very stylish, very usable as well. So you can get larger logs inside of this stove than you can this stove. So depending on your needs, big tent, small tent, very cold temperatures, not so cold, this is going to require a little bit more wood prep because you're going to be cutting smaller. This stove is a little bit less wood prep because you can cut those pieces longer. So let's get the stovepipe on top of this. Like I mentioned, I'm actually going to be using the 2-meter stovepipe from this stove because today it's very windy and I don't need a 3-meter pipe jetting up into the sky, catching all that wind. I am going to use the spark arrestor, and the spark arrestor has these 3 little fins. I'm going to hook on little carabiners and run guy lines down to the ground to stop the pipe from swaying in the wind. I'm going to do all of that, and then I've got some firewood over here. I'm going to get that in the stove, and we're going to do a test burn. All right, guys, I got the T1 Mini set up with the stovepipe. I do have 3 guy lines coming off the very top of the spark arrestor. There's one right here on my hand. If the camera picks that up, it's a really thin nano cord. So what I did is I took 3 little carabiners and I clicked them into the holes on the spark arrestor and guided out. Where we are out in the open, the wind's going to blow that pipe all over the place. This will stop that from happening. So let's get some wood inside of the stove and let's get it burning. I do have some pre-cut wood over here. What I'm using is little bits from 2x4 because it's really dry. And I also have some bits of hardwood cut up from the last stove review video that I did. Try and grab it all over here. So let's get one of these fire starter bricks, which are awesome to use, really handy. I'm going to get all this loaded in here. So we'll start with all of our little bits of tinder, get our fire starter underneath, and we'll get this burning, and hopefully it'll perform well. I have really high hopes for this stove. I've been really excited for this for quite a while because I've had the large stoves, but now that I have smaller tents, the large stove, it works, and it works very well, but it hasn't gotten cold enough in my area yet to really use the large stove in a small tent and be comfortable, because it gets really hot. So the large stove works really well in heating those spaces, large and small spaces. But this small stove, like I said, I'm really excited to not only pack a smaller stove, but to also have a smaller stove inside of the tent and a little bit more room to move around. So let's get this burning. Looks like it's going pretty good so far, actually. That thing's already throwing a lot of heat. It's only been burning for about 30 seconds. That thing's really taken off. The top of the stove is already starting to turn bronze very fast. I haven't had a titanium stove change color that fast. Wow. That's throwing a lot of heat. Whew. Now, like I said in previous videos, where we have the stove out in the open, there is a breeze coming from behind the camera ramming right into these jets, which may force smoke out the sides of the stove. That does not happen inside of a tent because there's no air blowing directly into the vent. So keep that in mind. There's a puff of smoke there I just saw. Just keep that in mind when you're inside of a tent. It doesn't leak smoke. There's no air ramming in there to force it out like you can see right now. It is burning very hot though, I will say. See if we can damp that down a little bit. So that front vent is very responsive. Immediately it died down quite a bit. Listen to that thing go. Whew, whew. We've got some really nice purples and blues starting to form on the top of the stove. We're at about the 2-minute mark of burn time right now. It is just throwing heat. So I'm going to open up the door and get some dense hardwood in there. This is hard maple. Get some in here and see how it likes that. Whew. Hot. Get some more softwood in there at the same time. Try and get this thing ripping. Let's heat it up really quick and see what happens. More hardwood. Another piece of softwood in there just for kicks. Let's see what happens. Open that vent back up. So I should mention the damper on the back of the pipe is wide open as well. Now we've got the whole front vent open. That's a fair bit of wood inside of a tiny little stove. Oh yeah, nice and warm. So as you can see, the difference between these two stoves is quite large. It's quite huge actually, because I mean, you look inside of the door, I mean that goes back really far. This piece of wood is what I would normally burn inside of here. I mean, I still got another 4 inches. I don't like loading the stove full of wood that's actually from the back to the front. I like cutting it about 3 to 4 inches short because then you can kind of wiggle it around and move it and you don't have to fight to get it in there. So you can really see the differences between them. This is drastically smaller than this, giving it a huge advantage in a smaller tent. So the stove seems to be handling all of that wood, even the hardwood, very, very, very well. It's damped down, it's stabilized. I've been messing around with the damper forward and backwards. This stove is very, very responsive immediately. As soon as you touch it, there's an immediate change. I can already hear it fluttering more. The flames are picking up a lot. Very responsive stove, and it's not burning the wood crazy fast either. Once you get it figured out and damp it down, it actually holds the burn for a long time. So while I'm waiting for this, I'm actually going to make a tea, and we're going to talk about cooking surface. So I'm going to take a measurement of the top of the usable cooking area, and we're going to compare it with the T1 so you guys can have an idea of what size dish and kettle you can get on top of the T1 Mini. All right, so taking a measurement from the chimney to the front, we have 8 inches, 8 5/8. 8 5/8, and we already know that the top is 7 3/4. So this kettle that I have right here measures 5 inches wide. That gives you a really good idea of what you can fit on top of there. Now if we go to the T1 and we take a measurement from where the pipe starts to the front of the stove, we are at 11 3/4 inches. And of course the top is 8 7/8 wide. So you could fit 2 of these kettles on top of this, no problem, and a large frying pan or whatever else you have to cook with. But this stove can also fit a very large frying pan. So you do still have a lot of cooking area on this stove. I mean, if I move the kettle all the way to the front, you still have room for a cup if you want to put a little cup on there, or if you want to push the kettle to the back, you can still fit a little frying pan on top to do your eggs or whatever you're cooking. There is still a lot of usable space on the stove, making it really excellent for heating your tent and cooking. So looking at the front of the stove, we kind of have to address the glass because I've been having a lot of comments and questions about glass in a stove. Not just Pomoly stoves, but many other stoves. This glass is actually tempered glass. It's made for wood stoves. So it's the same type of glass that would be in your wood stove in your home, okay? This stuff is very, very resilient to impact. It's very, very flexible with heat, meaning it's not going to crack when you throw your wood in there and light your fire early in the morning. It is a very stable glass, and it's very, very, very difficult to break. It's also very easy to clean. This stove in particular, I have not cleaned this since I came home from an overnighter a couple days ago, and I had this thing going all night. As you can see, I wiped it off with my finger just minutes before filming, and it came off really easy. The same thing is going to happen with this. When I'm done burning in it, I will open up the door and show you when I run my finger across it, that black soot will come off right away. Now there is a trick with this. Do not burn nasty wood, okay? Birch bark is known for making glass black and kind of creosote filled. If you're doing any pine, that's the reason why I used 2x4s today, is it kiln dried. There's no sap or resin in it. The best thing to burn in your wood stove with a glass window is good clean hardwood. Typically what I will do is I will take my knife and I'll take the bark right off of the wood, bringing it down to just the bare wood. This bark holds a lot of moisture and a lot of resin from the tree. If you can scrape the bark off of your wood, or if you already found wood that the bark's missing from, it will help you out a long way in not having a dirty window. Now, once you get these stoves burning correctly and they're self-sufficient, you can actually damp down this little damper. It will stabilize, and it will actually self-clean itself inside. It'll actually burn off all that carbon and creosote off of the glass and back crystal clear if you don't touch it. So that is a little trick. I don't know how long it'll take with this stove because this is my first time using it, but I know with this stove, If I damp it down and let it do its thing for about half hour, I can come back and the whole glass will be clear. The only time you're gonna have any kind of black or sootness starting to build up is the opening and closing and the messing around with the vent and the damper. That's creating a lot of turbulence and is pushing all that black creosote and smoke to the front and not out the chimney where it's supposed to go. So, very easy to clean. The glass is very effective. It also helps you light the inside of the tent with natural light, natural fire light I should say. And it allows you to look in and see what the fire's doing so you don't have to come over and constantly open the door to look inside. All right, I think my water is boiled for my tea. Oh yeah. Can't go wrong with that. So, the stove is performing very, very well, I will say. I have loaded a couple more pieces of hardwood in there and I pushed it to the back side of the stove. So this side is now starting to turn purple. This side, as you can see, has already got some purples and blues. The rear of the stove also has some purples and blues coming in. Very nice. I've got the damper shut down almost all the way. If you listen really carefully, you might be able to hear the difference when I open it. I know, I'm gonna hold on a second because there's a big gust of wind. It is very windy out today, bear with me. Let's open this and see if we can hear a difference. I know I can hear it. You can just hear like a rushing jet engine. It just takes right off, right out the flue really nicely. And inside those flames have just jumped. So, very nice, very compact titanium stove. Like I said, it is 1 millimeter in thickness, just like the T1. So it's not going to warp like those other cheap, thin titanium stoves on the market. This is built to last. It's very durable. It flat packs really nicely. It's super easy to get inside of your backpack. I've already put it in all of my backpacks that I own, and this thing just slides in no problem. Getting the T1 into my backpack, as some of you know, I do slide it in the hydration sleeve of my pack. This one is a little challenging to get in there. This guy falls right down to the bottom, works really well. So, there's some birds flying over. So, it fits really well. I'm almost tempted to even try putting it in the hood of my large 75 liter pack. If it fits, I'll let you guys know. But I think right now, I'm going to enjoy my tea. I'm going to let this stove burn out, get it cooled down, and then we'll disassemble it and take a look at any kind of warpage or deformation. We'll have a look at the front glass like I was saying, and then we'll wrap up the preview / review of the stove. Okay guys, the T1 Mini is now cooled down. It's cooled to the touch to where the top's still a little warm, but the glass is cooled down. Now I want to show you this. It is a little blackened from the soot. If I take my fingernail, I could scratch that off really, really easily. I'll bring it in for a close-up and then you can actually watch what I'm doing here. Very, very little pressure and it comes right off no problem. Even better with a damp cloth or one of those little green scrub pads for doing your dishes. Works perfectly fine. You're not going to scratch the glass. It works very well. So bring the camera in close and you can see what I'm doing here. So just really simply with my fingernail, wiping that off. Even with just my fingerprint, you can see that that's clearing up. You take your thumbnail and go right across. You can see how easily that glass is to clean. So what I bring with me is, like I was saying, one of those green scrub pads, and I use that for cleaning up my wok or my cookware, frying pan, whatever I got. Really quick wipe down with that, comes off no problem. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to disassemble both stoves and I'm going to lay them down both flat packs so you can get a really good look at the size comparison when they're packed flat. And then I want to take a measurement of the flatness and show you the dimensions of that so you guys can figure out how it'll fit inside of your pack. All right, so taking off the top of the stove, I almost forgot to talk about deformation. And the top of the stove did go a little wonky, which is really typical of most stoves. But once you put it back on top of the stove and you clamp it back on with the little finger screws here, or those little latches, it goes back on nice and flat. Pretty much every titanium stove on the market, all of my stoves have done this to a degree. Some are worse than others. The Pomoly stoves have very, very little deformation. So I'm not too worried about that, and there it goes. As soon as I undid that, you can see it pop up. But once you get all of these clamped back down, it's completely square, it's completely flat again. That's all of the deformation that I could find though. Just this little top piece. Like I said, once you clamp it down, it goes back square, no worries. And this is 1 millimeter thick titanium. So when you look at the deformation on this, very, very subtle. It's not even a problem. Think about the other stoves that are less than 1 millimeter. So the ones that are like 0.3 and 0.2 of a millimeter, they go wonky and they go really bad. All right guys, so now that we've got both stoves flat packed, I do have the pipe here. So you can see both of these components are very similar in size, but the difference is with the stove. So looking at the thickness of the stove, we have the T1 over here and the T1 mini over here. The thickness of the T1, if I can get this situated, here we go. The thickness of the T1 is 3 inches, and the thickness of the T1 mini, get this turned around here, is coming in at 2 1/8. So you can see a significant difference in pack size right there. Very nice for backpacking, very nice for smaller tents. This guy heats a small tent really, really hot. It also heats a large tent very hot. This is a great option for sliding in your backpack, having a nice cool night in the fall, or even keeping a small tent hot in the wintertime. So with all of that said, I hope this video was helpful to you in some way. Having a really good look at the T1 mini. This thing is outstanding. I'm really happy with this. Nice compact stove, gets very, very hot. I'm going to be using this a lot as well as my other stoves this coming winter. So if you do have any questions, drop it down in the comment section. I do have a separate video on the T1 as well as the rest of the Pomoly titanium stoves. So if you're curious about this, have a look at that down in my gear review and testing playlist, I believe is what I called it. Very, very good information on these stoves. I also have a 3-part series dedicated to how to get started in hot tent. Currently, I have the tent episode done. I show a whole bunch of tents. The next episode coming up is going to be all on stoves. I have about 5 to 7 different stoves that I'm going to be showing in that. And then after that episode, I'm going to go on to safety. So be sure to check out that series. And like I said, if you got any questions or comments, drop it down in the comment section and I'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.